our speaker today. I first met Gregg when I was 16 years old, and he was the Rotex president. And he was Mr. Cheerleader for Youth Exchange, and he convinced my parents that it was safe and it would be a great year for me, and he was so right. And so over the years, I have to say we've come and gone into one another's lives, but we have really stuck together maybe the last 10 or 12 years when Gregg joined the North Star District Committee to really lead the Rotex organization. And he just did a marvelous job and put so much great structure in with our weekends. I mean, Gregg is like unbelievable. So I am really thrilled to have a chance. I mean, Gregg refers to Sweden all the time. He teaches Swedish. He's been to Sweden so many times. But I am so happy to be able to see a concise, put together presentation of how his exchange affected his life. So Gregg, we welcome you, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Chrisanne. And I'll also say that I met Karen when she was 16 and interviewed her to be an exchange student. And of all things, and this was unpre-planned, she went to the same town that I had been in. And A, she can verify, is it the truth? And B, poor Karen, she had to live down the bad stuff I created, I'm sure. So she can, maybe I should disconnect the end of this and let her tell you that what really went on. Anyway, I went to Sweden. I'm Gregg White. Back then it was a multi-district of 595, 956. This business of 5950, 5960 was a relatively recent, to me anyway, development. Where the zero at the end of those two numbers came from, I'm not quite sure. I've never heard of anybody called a 5951 or 52 or 53, whatever. Anyway, I went in 1969, 1970, and that was the first year for these two districts to put their heads together and try and run their own program. The year before me, Katie Sarstedt, some of you might know Katie Sarstedt Orr, and she and I think about 15 or 10 other students went abroad from our district, but really went through Essex in Ohio. And so they were, I don't know how they got them down there, and they certainly didn't have Zoom back then, but I don't think they were oriented. Katie went to Brazil, more power to her, and God bless her. But the year I went was the first year that 595 and 596 tried to do it together on their own. And of course, the first time is a learning experience. So we'll go forward to one more slide, Kurt. So Rotary Youth Exchange was a multi-district, as I said, and in September, for the very first time of 1968, notice the upper left-hand corner, 595, 596, they sought at that time RYE participants. I had told my parents, and I had wanted to be an exchange student since 6th grade. I didn't know how to do it, but I had taken summer school every year so that I was a year ahead in my high school studies. So I had kind of a year to myself, although this was nominally my junior year abroad. And so they heard the announcement on the loudspeaker that Minneapolis district, or Minneapolis club, was seeking exchange students, and I applied. To be honest, I forged both my parents' signatures on the application. I didn't tell my parents that I really had gone through with this until the time came for the interview. As I recall, there were no district interviews. There were only club interviews from the Minneapolis club. I wanted to go through Minneapolis very much, because my father had been president of the St. Paul Club, and I wanted to go on my own, not because my father was who he was. In December, 44 people were accepted to go abroad, and soon in January, orientation was going to begin. It was 1968. Everything was exciting, except this happened. And Kirk will go through the following black and white panels. In January, the Tet Offensive begins. Heavy casualties happen on both sides. This is broadcast across the world, especially in Sweden, where they have at that time, a state-controlled media. And this really scared the tar out of Swedes as to what Sweden is about. Next. In March, the My Lai massacre takes place. And this is broadcast across the world. American soldiers are seen as cruel, barbaric, and nasty, doing these horrible things to people in Vietnam, North and South Vietnam. Sweden took the side of North Vietnam and shortly started shipping goods, non-military goods, to North Vietnam. Next, please. March 30th, the I Am a Man March takes place in Memphis. U.S. troops raise bayonets against participants. Take a look at this. Does this not look a whole lot like Black Lives Matter? The difference is that Black Lives Matter is male and female. In those days, it was just men. But it's a shocking thing that this could take place in '68, and this is 52 years ago, and I'm not sure how far we've gone. Next, please. April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King is killed. These guys are all pointing toward the assailant where he's at. You can see King lying there on the balcony. He's dead, and we feel in America, I mean, and across the world, they feel that we white Americans shoot Black Americans. Next, please. Two months later, Robert Kennedy is shot in Los Angeles, and he was the best Democratic hope we had to be elected and to end the war. The war in Vietnam was raging. The war in Vietnam was tearing this country apart, left, right, and backwards. And again, Sweden had sided with the North Vietnamese. Next, please. In August, of all things, the Warsaw Pact, which is what the Soviet Union and its satellites, similar to the NATO, except NATO, of course, the United States and its satellites, invaded Prague. You can see King Wenceslas Square in the center of Prague, and the Soviet tanks, and they just literally squashed what was going on in Czechoslovakia. Very similar to the Tiananmen Square that you might remember in China. The thing to remember is that southern Sweden is closer to Prague than it is to Stockholm. Next. In 27 was the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Humphrey, who was seen as pro-war, was nominated. Obviously, Kennedy was dead, and he was fighting. He was running against another Minnesotan from McAllister College, who was definitely anti-war. Humphrey, being perceived as pro-war, was tainted, and I think that cost him the election. I remember I was at the home of Sam Nakanishi, a co-worker of my father at the time. His wife, Catherine, made the first time I ever had sukiyaki dinner, and this was on the TV. Both Sam and Catherine had met in an internment camp in California during the war. They were not pleased with this going on. Next, clerk. And finally, in 1968, November, Richard Milhouse Nixon, remember that middle name Milhouse Nixon, is elected president. And I remember him touching his breast pocket saying, I have a secret plan to end the war. And that's why he got elected. And of course, there was no secret plan. And Nixon was, of course, compared to somebody else, he might be pretty similar. He might be pretty good, but you know, Nixon had to resign in shame, and his running mate, Spiro Agnew, had been forced out of office for corruption before then. Next, please. And we're going to '69 but Sweden is perceived in Sweden as imperialist. I hadn't even heard the word before, but I got to Sweden and learned that word in about 2.5 seconds. Racist and is a threat to world peace. On October 16, about a month and a half after I arrived in Sweden, Olof Palme becomes the prime minister, and he was openly critical of the United States government and yet pro-American people. He was educated in Ohio, by the way, he went to college in Ohio, at Oberlin College. Olof Palme just went to the airways almost every day and tore the America to shreds. Next, please. And yet, Rotary Youth Exchange went forward and my great adventure began, and it was really a good adventure. I have to say that at the time, Multi-District 595, 596, which grew in to become North Star Rotary, they had no idea what they were doing. Let's be honest about this. They had these past orientations, if I may say so. My father never went to any of them. My mother went, and they were downtown Minneapolis. She was in a room, shunted off to another room, and told to drink coffee with other mothers and fathers, I suppose. And the orientation consisted primarily of, oh, where's Sweden? Oh, it's over there in Europe. Okay, thank you, goodbye. And that was about it. No attempt to teach us the language, no attempt really to talk about world affairs. I think the Rotarians, who in those days were a bunch of old white men, and they really tried. In subsequent years, it became much, much better. On August 5th, I arrived in Hammenhög in southern Sweden with 104 other exchange students. In those days, all the exchange students came from Canada or the United States or went to Canada, the United States. It was not a hub, and it was a hub and spoke system as opposed to across the world system. So every other exchange student from Rotary who I ever met was an American or was a Canadian. And in fact, 11 out of 104 came from Minnesota, and four of us went to the same town. From the Twin Cities, 4 of us went to the same town. The furthest away that I met another exchange student and got to know was St. Louis Park. 2 of us were from the same high school. That really should never had taken place. At least we could have met people from other parts of the world. But anyway, we had a great time in southern Hammenhög, in southern Sweden. I will tell you that on my first Saturday in Sweden, which is about 6 days later, my then Swedish brother, my Swedish host brother, takes me to something called Folkets Park, which is kind of like a county fair in Ystad in Sweden, at which I had my first, and I'm glad to say my last and my final assassination attempt right then and there in the Folkets Park. They took a fellow walked up to me. He may have had a cocktail or two, a beer or two, and he said, you American? Yeah, fuck you. Pulls out his knife and makes a stab for me. Goes between my arm and my torso. My little Swedish brother, who's about 6'4", and I'm far away from that, grabs me by the scruff of the neck, pulls me away at about 70 miles an hour, and his 2 friends informed this guy who pulled the knife on me that perhaps was not the wisest thing to do. In other words, to beat the tar out of him. I think that really kind of told me that Americans were not very welcome in Sweden, which is somewhat true with certain people. We finished the school and we went to I went to Säbygård in 15 kilometers from Huskvarna, Småland. Kurt, if you go to the next slide, please. And I know this slide is very small, it's very hard to see, but let me just tell you that Hammenhög is in very, very southern Sweden. Hammenhög is just outside of Ystad. Ystad is where the ships went to Poland. Sweden, of course, being a neutral country, there was lots of trade between Poland and Sweden, and frankly, the ships that went to went to Poland were known as the abortion ships, because the abortion was not allowed in Sweden at the time, but was allowed in Poland. I went north up to Huskvarna, Småland, and I know it's hard to see on this map because Sweden's such a big country, but Huskvarna is on the southeastern corner of a very, very large lake. It is kind of like going to Duluth. Big hills are behind Huskvarna, and big hills all around the lake. And the lake is very deep and very, very clean, cold water. Huskvarna had been there for at least 400 years. They had a waterfall. They have a waterfall there that is open only certain days of the year, like holidays, and the rest of the time, all the water goes through pipes and into mills, and has done so for centuries. To give you an example, the drop of a waterfall in Huskvarna is 300 meters, and the drop of a waterfall at St. Anthony is 15 meters. That means they have tremendous, tremendous water power dropping down. And what they're able to do is rifle muskets so that you have to carve a spiral into a musket in order to make it a rifle. And because of that, because they had this water power, Huskvarna has been creating some very good weapons for hundreds of years. By the time I got there, Huskvarna was making almost no, if any, any weapons at all, but was the father country or father company to this little thing called Frigidaire that you might have heard of across the world. And my Swedish father was a subcontractor to Frigidaire. Next slide. Here you see our graduation, what we were like as exchange students in those days. Boys had long sideburns, longish hair. The girl who's looking at us over the shoulder there is Kathy Iverson. She's from Minnesota. And just lots of fun times. But if you notice, the Rotary Blazer had yet to be introduced. Next slide. That's Libby Rockwell, the very first Minnesota Rotex president. We really elected a guy. Well, anyway, I'll explain that. But that's Libby, and she did a great job as president. Next, please. She went to a town, by the way, not maybe, I don't know, 100 kilometers from me. So Savvy Gord, this is my first house in Husqvarna, and really it's the main house for me in Husqvarna. Oh, the picture is cut in half, but anyway, I'm sorry about that. This is what's known as a manor house in Sweden. I know you can't quite tell because projection isn't quite well, but the dining room table, which is the upper left-hand two windows, could seat 54, if that gives you an idea. The house had 3 kitchens. We sat on a farm roughly the size of North Oaks entirety, and others the size of a township. We had, next slide, I'll go on. This is the view from the upper balcony in the music room. Landtrön is on top of the hill, and there is a hydroelectric plant going powered by this lake and its water shed into Lake Vättern, and again, water came there. I couldn't understand why it was so important to the family, to my host family, that the gravel in front of the yard was always raked and looked pretty. That was something new to me. I never experienced that. I thought, gee, what treasury that is. Next slide. Here we see Landtrön. Everything you can see on this side of the lake, of course, is part of part of our farm, and this is maybe 1/20th of the farm. Next slide. About 90% of the farm was deep Småland forest filled with moose and deer and fox and more, and eventually often me. I was a city kid. I didn't know, we'd had a cabin, but really didn't know much about forest. I knew a little bit about woods, kind of. I really knew a little bit about, farm fields, but I did not know anything about forest. Plus, I was very, very allergic to poison ivy, and there's no poison, anything like that in Sweden. The doft on the ground up here, once you got into the forest, was at least 6, maybe 10 inches deep. That was just incredible. And the forest was so deep. The moose hunting, by the way, in Sweden is an aristocratic and very important sport to them. And I didn't fully understand that until I tasted moose meat and then realized, oh my gosh, this is awfully good. Next, please. As a city kid, I grew to love Savvy Gord, who you can see it from the top of the hill just before you enter the forest. And again, pretty much everything you can see on this side of the smaller lake is Savvy Gord. On the Gord, by the way, is farm. On the other side of the lake are other farms. And then off in the distance, you see Vättern, where the town of Husqvarna is. Next, please. This is, I'm sad to say, my messy room in Savvy Gord. I had a desk and, of course, a comfortable chair on the right and a wingback chair, what the Swedes call a wing chair on the left. I enjoyed this room. Of course, this is my Swedish brother's room, and he was in Minnesota while I was over there in Sweden. I closed the curtains so that we didn't get too much reflection. Next, please. These are my siblings, and by the way, they're all in their 50s or 60s now, but that's Johan on the far left, Håkan holding the camera, my Swedish sisters, Marie, and then me. Marie and I were off on our way to a costume party somewhere. Next, please. Or Kirk is, no, that's not the end of it, I don't think. Or maybe that is. So Kirk, could
I
you,
think
if
that,
that is the end of it, could you cue up the video, please?
yep, that is the end of it. So let me
Okay.
stop sharing that, and I will go ahead and talk, and I'll get it queued up here. You'll see when it's on the screen.
So this 3-minute video is from 2015. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, but it gives you a sense of what the town is like. Oh, hi, Stephanie. Hi, Sam. It gives you a sense of what the town is like. And like I said, it reminds me when to accept that this is Husqvarna at that time, and I suspect Karin can confirm this. Husqvarna was an extremely bifurcated town of white collar, blue collar, and either you worked in the factory or you didn't. And if you worked in the factory, you're a whole different group of people. So this is Husqvarna. I think there's a sound with this, Kirk, if you can. So that's what I have on my presentations. And I'm sure that the Husqvarna looked like a whole lot of towns in Finland, with the red roofs and the almost no single family units were available in town. Almost all the housing was either 2 families or 4 families or a row house, etc. And the tile roof was very common, etc. They didn't quite have the single family units like we have in America. And frankly, I really enjoyed that. I thought that the density was so much greater. It was really kind of fun to be around. What was my Rotary Club? My Rotary Club welcomed me within a few days. That was about it. We were told who our counselor was. I almost never saw him throughout the year. We were invited to the Christmas party because we agitated for it, but we weren't really welcomed that much. And when we were about to go home, we asked to go and say goodbye, and they kind of begrudgingly welcomed us there, or invited us back to that. But that was really all I saw of the Rotary Club, including, I don't think the Rotary Club made any pre-plans with the high school that we were going to attend that. We went to the high school. We met the rector. My sister brought me there, my Swedish sister that brought me there, not the Rotary Club. And he was kind of curmudgeonly, and his budget was probably stressed. And they have a very different school system there, and it wasn't explained that I remember that I understood it because, you know, if you've grown up with that school system, that's what there is, and they assumed everybody had the same type of school system. But anyway, so I pretty much tagged along with my sister. My sweet sister, she was in the same grade I was in, but she was very, very clever at languages. She ended up being able to take shorthand because they didn't have dictation machines or email. She was able to take dictation in Swedish, English, and French by the time from high school. I was a loser as far as that concerned. We did go to the rector, we the 4 exchange students, and say to him that we'd heard that they offered Swedish language instruction on the radio, and could we be assigned a broom closet, something that we listen to the radio, learn Swedish? No, that could not be done. Could not be done. And he, you know, he was unwelcoming. I think that was probably September was probably the last time I saw or heard of him. And my memory is that the physics teacher was very welcoming. That was not part of my sister's thing, but and I enjoyed physics. I still remember the physics I learned there, and the physics there was better than any instruction I got in America. But in those days, you had to take 2 or 3 foreign languages. So I was plopped in a German advanced class. You know, I didn't know the gates, much less, you know, how do you do. I had a little bit of French behind me, but French in my case was Québécois, not Français, and I didn't understand what the teacher was saying there. And of course, I was in I don't know, 8th ring, 9th, 10th ring Swedish. I didn't understand anything there. I knew one word when I arrived, hey, or, you know, we all know that in America, from Minnesota. And high school, frankly, was for me a disaster, and maybe I should have applied myself more, probably not, probably, maybe, yes, I should have applied myself really hard. But by about January, the 3 of us who remained, the other girl from my high school, she went home before Christmas or before Thanksgiving, we all essentially dropped out of school. That's really too bad, but we did other things instead. And we went around town, we visited every nursing home and every preschool in town and told them about Minnesota as best we could in Swedish, as best we could in English. We told them about America, that not everybody in America was a My Lai killer, not everybody in America was pro-Vietnam. They were shocked to learn that. I remember that my high school English book in Sweden showed 2 tenement houses with a chain link fence in between, and behind that were some African-American kids. And I really had to convince people really hard that no, white Americans do not keep Black Americans behind fences and ghettos and constrained behind walls. That was a really hard thing to teach. Granted, we weren't teaching African Americans very good back then nor now, and then African Americans had been able to sit at the lunch counter at Woolworths for only about 6 years, but we certainly didn't keep people behind walls. Like all teenagers, I caused trouble. I'm sure I was not a good son all the time, and yet my Swedish parents, my primary parents, stuck with me through thick and thin. In January, I moved into town with what I would call my Swedish grandparents, who didn't know my Swedish parents very well, but they were older and they kind of like grandparents. They gave me what we would call a mother-in-law suite here in America. I could shut the door and I could do whatever I wanted for the rest of the night. But I bought a ski pass at the local ski mountain. Right in town was a ski hill, and I went skiing almost every night. It was just great. I had a great time. That was fun. I do regret having gone to visit my American sister in Belgium at the time for Christmas. I wish I stayed in Sweden, but I didn't. But I didn't know how important Christmas was to Swedes. It certainly wasn't that important to us. I ran into huge troubles with Rotary. I have a natural curiosity. I wanted to see things. I wanted to travel, at least go nearby. I'm a train nerd of the worst degree. The town next to us, or the town next to Husqvarna was called Jönköping. In those times, Jönköping was in a different county than was Husqvarna. The sport hall for the high school was located in Jönköping, officially according to Rotary out of Stockholm, I was not allowed to cross county lines. Therefore, I couldn't even go to the sport hall for my very own high school, according to Stockholm. My Swedish father, my wonderful Swedish father, said, Greg, listen exactly to what they have to say. You listen to what they have to say. And we, these Stockholm Rotarians, read me the riot act as I was going to the sport hall and going to Jönköping. As Carmen can say, Jönköping is a hop, skip, and a jump away. And then the Rotarians went back to Stockholm. He said, I'm so glad you listened to them. Greg, you go to Jönköping. So that was kind of a part of it. But I could not go to Nässjö, which is the town next door where the big train yard was. I really wanted to see that and other things, but that was not to happen. So for the Rotex who are on board and are on this call, I'm sure you've heard the 4 Ds, which begins with do not drink. Many of you have probably heard this anecdote. My very first dinner at my Swedish family's house on Sävegård, my mom had made a wonderful meal. By the way, she was a very, very good cook. And I was, of the 5 kids, I was the only one who was keen on learning how to cook. And boy, did she like that. Oh my goodness. So she and I spent many hours in the kitchen cooking together. Frankly, I was the only kid who knew that up here in the upper right-hand top shelf to the left of the sink is where she kept all the wine, which later became a problem for her. But I was the only kid of the 5 of us who knew that the wine was up there. I just don't understand that. Anyway, at my very first meal, I sit down and my Swedish father determines that, this kid can drink this and this kid can drink that. And he puts a beer down next to me. I have not been in the home for 4 hours. And I, say, oh, I'm in the Rotary Exchange. I'm not supposed to drink beer. I'm so trying to be a Mr. Goody Good Two Shoes. And he puts his arm on my shoulder and right there, I'll never forget this. And he says, Greg, no son of mine enjoys a decent dinner without a bottle of beer. Boom. So virtually every dinner thereafter, I had beer. I was 16 years old. It was great. We could travel with approved travels. So there was at the end of the year, a Euro tour, which had to be by airplane because of the Iron Curtain. We had to fly over Germany. We couldn't go into Germany, etc. And there was an approved sport. Sweden has what's known as a sport holiday in March or April, depending on where you are. And if it's an approved high school sport event, I could go on that. So I spent a week in Kitzbühel in Austria skiing, and that was great fun. There was one district conference, but so the only time I ever saw the other exchange students from America were at the language camp for the first 2 weeks. Some of them were at the district conference, and by then it was, April or something, we kind of forgotten who each other were, and at the end of the year, the Euro tour, and that was it. I saw very, very little Sweden outside of Huskvarna, Jönköping. My Swedish family, like my American family, were not curious like I am. So, for example, I never saw the city park in Jönköping until my second year, until I went back to Sweden. There are many, I've never seen the factory in Huskvarna. There are many things we just didn't see. On the other hand, I had this incredible, huge forest filled with all these critters up behind me, and I just fell in love with the forest. And for a city kid's perspective, that just was totally unexpected to me. I spent hours and hours. My sister still talks about this. Hours and hours up there in the forest by myself. When I returned to Sweden, went to university in Sweden, I had stolen a rope from the barn, and harkening back to my Boy Scout days, I had taken 5 probably this big logs, lashed them together, made them vertical, and up deep in the woods was a very deep, maybe a 20-foot gully. At the bottom was a creek, and boy oh boy, a moose could jump over that gully, but a human couldn't. And so if you were up there hunting and the moose jumped over this thing, and as a human you couldn't go after him, you lost your moose. Well, I built this bridge, probably 15 feet long, I don't know, and put it over the gully. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I used it a lot. I thought it was convenient. And my returned 4 years or 3 years later, my Swedish father goes, Greg, he's very, 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 very serious. Always very imperious. Greg, did you take a rope when you were here from the barn? And I thought, oh my God, I'm in deep trouble. I am in doo-doo, this high. You just can't believe. And he says, did you build a bridge across the gully? And I go, oh God, I'm in trouble now. He said, we have used that bridge so many times, we couldn't figure out who built it, how this got to be there. Oh, that is such a great thing. Thank you so much. Anyway, so instead of being in doo-doo, I was a hero, I guess, for that time. When it came
Greg,
back to, yeah.
Can I just interrupt? We have about 5 minutes before 5:30.
Okay.
We can allow you to keep talking. You're intriguing everybody, I'm sure, or we can allow for questions. But if people need to leave at 5:30 for their schedules, totally okay. Just sneak off the call. Do you have more stories you'd like to share, or do you want to open it up for questions?
Let me finish a couple more stories if I may, Kurt.
Yep, absolutely.
I came back to America. I realized I learned crappy Swedish. I went to the U of M, learned pretty good Swedish there. Long story short, I went back to Uppsala University, and as a Swede and as an American, it harkened me back to the 70s show. My friends, my corridor comrades in Sweden learned very quickly that the other Americans never learned Swedish and were majoring in beer drinking, and I was not. And they soon called me the foreigner, utlänningen, because they didn't want people speaking English to me, and I don't speak English to anyone. That was kind of fun. I came back to America. Oh, by the way, between my two visits in Sweden, I'd become a behind Libby Rotex president. In those days, Rotary, North Star Rotary was, what became North Star Rotary, was trying to do the same things we do today, i.e. overnights. But instead of planning those things, they just gave Rotex $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 and said, go plan it, go do it, go execute it. And Rotex not only planned where we were going, but did most of the cooking. Pretty amazing. There was actually a point in time when they were talking about maybe buying what we'd call a food truck today for Rotex, and so that Rotex could prepare all the meals for all the inbounds. Pretty amazing stuff. I went back to Sweden. I came back. I think Chris Sam became president the year I came back, or 2 years after I came back. But those were such young people. I didn't want to have anything to do with those young people. Rotex always move on. They go into other things. Eventually, I joined St. Paul Rotary Club. St. Paul Rotary then, and I think now, is a bunch of stodgy old guys. Oh my goodness. There are about 4 or 5 of us younger people, find under 50, I think, in that club. It was all guys, in those days, no gals. And oh, neat. Anyway, they bent the rules occasionally, let's put it that way. I was never one, as you all know, I'm gay. I was never one who put up with being in the closet very good. And once I came out, it took me a long time to come out, but once I came out, I would not be in the closet much longer. I appeared on the front cover of the GLC Voice, Gay Lesbian Voice, in town as an advocate for gay rights. I was called in the St. Paul Rotary office with the president and some other people in Rotary, and you're supposed to serve on committee as the Rotarian. And they told me from then on, I was to have no contact with any exchange students. I was not to sit on any youth exchange committee. I was not to have any contact with Rotex. I was essentially banned from anything that related to youth exchange thereafter. And what I had seen these guys do would, it makes Fred Flintstone going to his conventions seem pretty easy. I left the St. Paul Rotary Club not long thereafter. I joined the Golden Valley Rotary Club. They didn't have a youth exchange program. I did some stuff there, and just said, if I can't be part of youth exchange, I'm not going to be part of Rotary. So anyway, so that's kind of my story. But those who don't know, right now I'm working for the Swedish Council of America for 10 more days. Then I retire in 10 days. about half, no, 1/3 of my day, 1/4 of my day is in Swedish, 3/4 is in English. I never know when I pick up the phone what language they're going to be speaking with at me, which is great. So that's kind of my story. I can always answer lots of questions.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing your story. That was very interesting. Does anybody have any questions? We want to kind of hold to the 5:30 where we're at right now, but why don't we open it up for 1 or 2 questions, and then we can dismiss from there. Anybody want to unmute?
I don't think I have a question, but Greg, that was so awesome. Thank you, thank you.
Well, as you know, Christine, I can go on forever. Karin can verify some of the stuff I said.
Oh, cool.
All right. Well, we're right at an hour, and I think that you covered your story very well. I think that there are opportunities to reach out to Greg individually if you would like to learn more about his experiences in Sweden or his experiences taking that to the next level where now he teaches and uses that experience, kind of lifted him into a professional realm. And we congratulate you on your future retirement coming up soon. So with that, we will go ahead and end our time together. Thank you everyone for being here. Please check out our website, rotaryeclub5960.org. All of our previous speakers are on there. And so if you missed any, you can certainly watch those, request a makeup if you would like, but this will be on in the next day or so as well. And you can share it with your friends. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chris, for coordinating this. Much appreciated.
Yay, Greg.
Thank you. Good job, Greg.
See you all.